Mike is a multi-medal Paralympic skier whose Paralympic career spanned almost 20 years and 6 games. We discuss his sporting journey from Paralympic athlete to chairman of the British Paralympic Association, as well as hearing about the foundations of British blind sport and find the answers to the age-old question, why change the name from BASRAB to British Blind Sport, and why was the organisation set up in Leamington Spa? We hope that you enjoy our conversation. So, Mike, after that introduction, how lovely to see you. And I'm
Uh,
so glad that you've agreed to do this.
It's good to be here and on a very worthwhile occasion in terms of 50 years of BBS.
I know it's gone so quickly, hasn't it? I mean, I've been here nearly 15 years now, and it's gone in the blink of an eye.
Mm.
How did you become one of the founding members of BBS? And I know it was originally called BASRAB, and we can go into that a little bit as well. But how did that come about, and what were your initial goals for the organisation?
My journey, I think, started probably in the early 70s. When I left school in London, there was virtually no sport available for people with vision impairment. There was a London Sports Club, did some rambles and a bit of swimming, and had a cricket team. As a number of us youngsters sort of left, we tried to sort of be involved with that, but it really wasn't sort of hitting the button for us. So 8 of us met in a pub in London and set up the Metro Sports Club. And that suddenly snowballed. From 8 people within, I don't know, a few months, we had 80 people wanting to do
Yeah.
sport. We then got invitations to go skiing in Norway in 74. We did a goalball tournament in Germany. And we suddenly thought, this is amazing. All these opportunities that we're now being able to have. There was a football event that we started in Holland Park School so we could do football as a proper evening class. And we just thought this was amazing. And word got round that why wasn't this available on a broader base? Why
Yeah.
couldn't other areas have it? So a number of individuals from Barclays Cricket Club that were around at the time, some of the other sports groups are around the time. What we need is an organization that perhaps could bring some of these together, look at the rules of some of the sports, provide more opportunities. So we had a meeting with a number of individuals, and probably most of them, sadly, aren't necessarily around anymore. And we decided that what we would set up is a nationwide, across the board, initially in England, basically called the British Association of Sports and Recreational Activities of the Blind. And
Hmm.
luckily, that's now shortened to BBS. And that was it. We basically came together and said, okay, we could have an overarching body, and then basically that could then start to look at what options might be available across areas. From there, the Scottish Association, SASRAB, also set themselves up. And then we were then able to go up and have athletics meetings in Scotland, and they
Brilliant.
would come down to London.
Wow. So you really have been instrumental in not only British blind sport, but also that element with Metro as well. And for any of the people listening to this, Metro is still a very big and thriving organization in the London area, but actually now reaches out in different ways, not just with sport, but educating and supporting others across sport and recreational and all kind of hosts of things. So, I mean, that's really amazing, really. Just how you've kind of started that journey. And just as one of the founding members, what was your particular role?
What I did originally was having set up the initial constitution and stuff like that, because I'd had the experience of setting up Metro a couple of years earlier, and also I'd set up the British Ski Club for the Disabled around the same time. I obviously had experience of looking at what the Charities Commission wanted and coming up, if you like, with a bit of the structure that was needed to have the first sort of foundation of BBS as a charity. Then obviously what you were then doing is promoting it through what Metro were doing. So we had the Metro Games started in 77. So that was a national event. And we had something like 70 or 80 vision impaired athletes turning up from everywhere, including
Brilliant.
some from abroad. So suddenly you've got that broader base to link back to athletics events in northern sports, etc., etc. And
Yeah,
then we set up the athletics subcommittee, British Blind Sports subcommittee, that I then chaired with people like Roy Smith. And we managed to get some incredible athletics coaches then to help run the national side of athletics through
yeah.
BBS.
And actually, some of the work that the likes of yourself and Roy have done there have really been helpful in sort of kick a lot of people's careers. I think for us, we're always going to be a grassroots organisation, but when we know people have started their careers at British Blind Sport, they may have come along to one of our Have a Go days and then they've gone off and represented their country because they've just found that they're so good at something. That's really heartwarming for us, but that's as heartwarming for us as, somebody joining us because they want to just they feel a bit isolated and they want to take up a sport. Our temping
Mm.
section, and you talk about these subsections, they're still very much alive and kicking, as well as archery. Sometimes somebody will come along and just say, well, I play temping now 3 or 4 times a month and I've made some friends. So sport, it's amazing what you're
Yeah.
saying. And I think just listening to you, it's about getting people active, isn't it? Originally, it's not
It,
all about those career changing, although, the two are very closely hand linked, aren't they?
I think that's right. And I think the communication of what's around has changed massively. And I
Mm.
think that's been the biggest challenge for a number of groups, including BBS and Metro and the others. When I started Metro and when BBS first started, I would say 90 odd percent of young people with a vision impairment were in special schools.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I would
and
agree.
therefore, their sporting knowledge came from peers, from the people at the school that were doing things, and basically said, well, if they're doing it, I'll have a go at it.
Yeah,
Suddenly, 50 years on, you've got kids in mainstream schools. And one of the biggest challenges that certainly BBS and other groups then met up with was post 2012 when the Paralympics were in London and we got national coverage of 150 hours from Channel 4. Suddenly, these kids in mainstream school were witness to people like them doing these amazing
yeah,
things on the telly. I know when you held some have a go events after the games, in the past we would hope for 20 or 30 people. 100 people turned up, and
absolutely.
that's amazing.
It's interesting, and that is the sort of the magic. Tim Reddish once said, because he was at the Paras at the time, as you know,
Yep.
he said it's sprinkling magic. And I remember thinking, I wonder what our magic will be at British Blind Sport, because obviously when you're working with the British Paralympic Association, you're working across all the impairment groups.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I recall the 2 weeks after the Paralympics Games were held in London, we took over 80 calls of people wanting to be a guide runner
Yeah.
because they thought, what can I do to help? What can I do to make change? So you're right, perceptions have changed and some of those barriers, and there's still many barriers, and we can come on to that. Some of those barriers have changed because I'd like to think society is seeing that there's a role for other people and that they can help make change as
Yeah.
well.
I mean, the guide runner is a good. You've got British Athletics now taking over some links in terms of VI Athletics. You've got a register of guide runners. So if you want to do a park run virtually any Saturday anywhere in England, you
Yeah,
can go on and almost guarantee to get a guide runner because
that's right.
the queuing up to help
It,
years ago would have been just unbelievable.
Unthinkable. Yeah, we've got our Find a Guide service for that. And we work with England Athletics, and they run an average of 10 workshops a year to get more guide runners to go onto the database. And they tell us every single workshop is oversubscribed.
Yes.
So, but the next step, it's a bit chicken and egg, because I always say, what's the dilemma here? Do we get loads of guide runners and hope that blind and partially sighted people will pick up the phone and say, I'd like to take up running? Or do we go to people and encourage them to take up running and then not have the guide runner? So it's kind of about getting that balance, isn't it?
And it's the expectation as well, in that when I was going through the VI education system 60 odd years ago,
Hmm.
the majority, virtue of all the kids in the special schools, were basically vision impaired and very few had additional disabilities. Now, 50, 60 years later, they reckon that
Yeah.
60% of VI children under 16 have got two or more disabilities. The complexity is there, but also the need is still there, and trying to meet that more complex need is part of the challenge.
Yeah, there are still many challenges.
Mm.
We've had a couple of situations only in this past couple of weeks of people with sight loss contacting us saying a local club says that they can't assist me. And that frustrates me because you talk about barriers and you talk about more than one impairment, particularly. And it doesn't matter if you've got one, two, or 10. In my mind, every club, every sports club, every leisure centre should be saying, what can we do to adapt to make this available to you? Because
Yeah.
those adaptations, and you'll know because you've been so involved with lots of sports, but those adaptations are not huge, are they?
No, no, and very often it is an access point. It's a mindset that's saying, "Oh, I didn't know people like you could do this, that, and the other." And it's almost
Yeah.
that educational aspect to say, with a minor adjustment. I've been to the gym this morning, and I go to different gyms in the past, and the attitude is the key issue. The gym I go to now,
Absolutely.
the staff will set the machines up if they're not audio accessible, and they don't make you feel as though you're adding a burden to their job. They actually genuinely want to enable me to do the exercise that I've come in and joined the gym for. And that is just that's mind issues, not nothing
Yeah.
to do with physical access or knowledge. It's basically just
Mm.
their attitude that makes it a fantastic environment for me to participate in.
Well, a massive shout out to that gym for sure, because that's music to our ears at British
Mm,
Blind Sport. There's twofold there. One, they're actually making the practical adaptations, but two, that willingness to want to assist. If somebody's making the adaptations, but they're doing it in a way that doesn't make you feel like you're valued as a member of the gym, then actually that negates the issue. But hearing that they're being willing and encouraging as well, that's great. And that's what we want for all clubs. I personally think perception, and there's perception on both sides, perception of somebody with sight loss about what they think their capabilities may or may not be, but also the perceptions of coaches and leisure centre staff about what they can do to assist. I find that to be one of the biggest barriers. But going back our 50 years, what do you think the biggest barriers were then, and what do you see are still barriers today?
I think the knowledge around the sports, so almost what I said just now about communication, that I think very often some of the biggest barriers we put in front of ourselves then were our own self-doubt.
Mm,
If people tell you people like you can't possibly do that, if you're told that often enough, you almost
yeah.
start to believe it. And luckily for me and some like-minded friends, as soon as someone said that's the thing you can't do, that
Mhm.
was the trigger that we wanted then to find someone to do it. And then we found the enablers. We found the guide runners. When I did the
Yeah.
London Marathon in 83 and 84, we managed to find people that would guide run. So it's 40 odd years ago. We managed to get people that would guide run myself and a couple of friends in the London marathons. We wanted to do canoeing. So basically, we managed to find someone that would be a front person in a canoe with us to do the Devices to Westminster. And these are really mad schemes that I don't think I've been in a canoe since having completed it. But it's those opportunities, finding the people when you've got a mad idea, finding someone that's even more mad than you are that says, "Yeah, I'll help you do that." I think that was the big crunch in those early days. So, and the breadth of sports was very small. There were
Mm,
football, there was bowls, there was athletics, and there was cricket. And basically, that was it. There was a bit of
mm.
rowing for the kids, that youngsters that had been to Worcester Grammar School. A lot of those had done rowing, but most other groups really hadn't done much else. And suddenly, you got people saying, "Well, what about tennis? What about shooting and
Archery.
archery?"
Yeah.
And and suddenly people saying, "Well, and then we got the Paralympics starting, where up until 1976, no blind athletes were included at the Paralympics. And so in 76, they said, "Oh, we're going to do winter sports," was the first one where the blind were included. Two or three of us had been doing the skiing in Norway. So we said, "Oh, well, we'll try that for that." So suddenly we became the first blind people to participate in the Paralympics. And
Well,
it starts to trigger.
yeah, that's a lovely segue because I was going to come on to your Paralympic career. Tell us a little bit about how you've represented our country. And may I say, looking at your biography, you've done a lot more than just be front facing as an athlete for the Paralympics. You've actually been chef de mission as well. So just give us a little bit of a flavour, really, Mike. I just must go back before I let you do that, though. I must say that I really like the fact that you said I just needed to meet other mad people, because I actually think it's bloody minded people that go, you can't tell me what I can't do.
Yeah.
We need a lot of people. We need them in disability sport as a whole, and we just need people like that in life, because they're the ones that prove life can be different. But just so, thank you for being like that. Thank you for being slightly mad, I think I want to say. Being a Paralympian, then tell us about your role in the Paralympics, both as an athlete and the positions that you've held there.
In 76, they basically said they were going to have winter sports. 5 of us that had been to the event in Norway that's still happening decided that we would go over to Norway, 74, 75, try skiing, and really loved it. And basically, they then said, 76, we're going to have winter sports Paralympics in Sweden. Do you want to be considered? So we went down to Aldershot. I had a plastic ski slope down there. We got trained with the army, and then Lieutenant Colonel Moore basically assessed us and selected the 5 of us, 3 totally blind, Graham Sam and Peter Young, sadly both of whom are no longer with us, and John Derek Howie from Scotland. And we became the 5 VI skiers to compete in the first Paralympics where blind people were
Wow,
included. And then
amazing.
they got included in the Summer Games 3 or 4 months later in 76 as well. So we were there. We were badly prepared. We had these plastic ski suits that didn't breathe, so you felt like a jungle fresh peanut. And we got no guides that we met for the first time when we got out to the games. 2 of them couldn't speak English. And we were in bed and breakfast where we had to be back by 9 o'clock. We stayed out late at night and got locked out, etc. So again, very hiccupy and very sort of poor. We didn't finish last, and we really, really loved it. And then a few months later, I went back to Norway skiing and met a guy who was managing director of ICI in Scandinavia. He
Hmm.
acted as my guide. His wife was English, and basically saw the love that we had. The next games were in Norway. So basically, he then became a sponsor. So for the first time, we actually had some money. We'd set
Hmm.
up the ski club for the disabled, who in those early days, this was obviously pre the Paralympic Association. So the ski
Yeah.
club for the disabled were effectively the governing body at those early winter games. And then we went to 80 games and did really well in Norway. We had all the support. Then I went to 84 and 88 games in Austria, and that was absolutely phenomenal. Basically, what I was doing as well as skiing was then managing the cross country team, because obviously we had no one with any additional
Wow.
experience of it. So I started managing the team and helping with the psychology, because I've been doing psychology as a social worker. And so
I was
you
about
were
to say, you've
doing,
been a social worker previously, haven't you?
that's right.
So,
I qualified in 76.
oh, wow.
I had to be slightly late at my last exam because I was over at the Paralympics. And then I qualified in June 76 as a social worker. So I started to use those sort of bits of it and contacts and links, and then the sponsor. And then in 92, I went to the games in France.
Japan.
I'd had a cruciate ligament issue where I'd ruptured it. So basically, that became my last actual competitive games.
Okay.
What happens often, if you're too injured or too old to actually compete, you then start to manage. So I managed then the cross country teams in 94, 98, and then 2002, I became chairman of the Paralympics. So I became chef de mission in Salt Lake City and Torino. By that time, as I say, I'd been to 9 winter games. I'd done
Goodness.
basically chef de mission, and then became chairman of British Paralympic Association in 2001, and then did chef de mission all the way through and head of delegation through to Beijing in
Yeah.
2008.
Just looking at that as well, not only have you done all of those games, but you've really traveled the world, haven't you? You've done France,
Yeah.
you've done Japan, you've done Sydney, you've done India, because you're also the manager of the first England blind cricket team, weren't you? And you in the
Yeah.
World Cup of India. I'm correct in saying that.
Yeah.
People often say sport is about fitness and health, but sport can take you to a lot of places, can't
Oh,
it?
a lot of places and a lot of opportunities. I mean,
Mm,
I look back and thinking, why aren't some of these incredible athletes? Why do they still not get snapped up by bodies
mm,
or sports bodies or committees? We've got so much to offer, and I just think I've been so lucky because the experience of managing in sport that I could then use some of those skills to my management in social work, and some of
mhm.
the skills I learnt in my social work I could then use in the sport, and then getting those opportunities. I just feel so lucky because of my involvement in that. I then got asked to be on the bid team for London 2012, so flying over to Cyprus and Athens and then over to Singapore when we won the bid, and being in the room when we won it, and then on the
Amazing.
organising committee, helping. I was on the advisory board setting up the anti-doping agency, and then served on the anti-doping agency for 6 years in sport. And that obviously meant I'd also been asked to go and be a governor at a university, which then we managed to link in and get sporting facilities at the university. And those opportunities, well, a lot of that's by luck, and that shouldn't be the case.
No,
There's
it
so
shouldn't.
many people out there through BBS and the others have got so much to offer, and
Mm.
getting that vitality and those skills out there is really a big issue that we still need to be pushing.
Do you think, Mike, just listening to all of that and just what tapestry of sport and, both as an athlete and somebody who's really helped shape sport, do you think any of that would have happened for you if you hadn't sat in that pub that day with those other seven gentlemen and said, should we set this up?
No, I think, and it almost goes back further than that because I went blind at age 10 from a firework accident. So
Mm,
my sporting career at 10, I thought was finished. That basically I was captain of the local primary school, junior school football team, cricket team, did athletics over at the local games area, and played out all the time doing sport. I suddenly had this firework accident, went to a special school. I thought, that's it, my horizons were really altered on my first day. I always tell this story, but it was so special for me. I went to Linden Lodge School for the Blind, and
mm,
I think I was 11 and a half. I,
hmm.
I didn't want to be in a boarding school. I didn't want to be away from home. I thought all they're going to be doing there is sitting, twiddling their thumbs, doing nothing. And I remember being shown around the school, and many of your younger listeners won't know what these are, but I suddenly got run over by a blind guy on a go-kart, which was like four wheels on a plank that you then
Yep.
steer, totally blind. I picked myself up and thinking, well, that was interesting, to be flattened then by a blind guy on roller skates chasing the go-kart. And I suddenly thought, oh, perhaps it's not quite so black then. Perhaps I can think about doing something rather than learning brow and twiddling my thumbs. And for me, that was really crucial. So getting those images, getting those people around you that can inspire you, can give you those options, or can actually say, well, have you tried blind tennis? Have you tried baseball or whatever the new sports that are coming online are? And they say, well, no, I haven't tried that. Where can I?
So they've influenced you. The guy on the go-kart, the kid on the roller skates, in a bizarre kind of way, they influenced you. That takes me to another question. Like disability sport, not just sport for people with sight loss, but disability sport has changed for good over this last 50 years. But I still feel we're a long way from getting it 100% right. But who do you think has been a good influence on disability sport over the years? Because I would say you are. From my perspective, and my role in sport, I would say, well, you're one of the very first people I always say, Mike Brace has made a huge difference. Who do you think has made that difference?
I think we've had a number of people highlighted over the years that have been instrumental in that. Some of them with a vision impairment. People like Noel Thatcher, obviously. I remember selecting him at the age of 16 to go to the first games that he went to. And there
Yeah,
was all sorts of things, oh, he's too young and this, that, and the other. And I think he won a bronze medal. So suddenly you've got someone competing at a higher level. You've got their performances. So people like him and Simon Butler were, I think
yeah,
Simon was the first one to do 400 meters in under 50 seconds. And that is an incredible athletic performance. That's not a sort of people saying, oh, well, they're disabled, aren't they wonderful? That's actually people saying, God grief, he could beat half the people in the club that they're running in. And
yeah,
so those sorts of people, Roy Smith, obviously, then taking on chairing and running different sports groups and really being a loud voice in both senses of the word in terms of what's needed and what's required. And then you've got broader aspects. You've had Tim Reddish, who then was involved with British Swimming. So therefore they're starting to actually be involved in the governing bodies that are running the sports. It's groups and things like that then start to push things forward. I
yeah.
think one of the key issues as well, which BBS have played over the years, is in the 80s, basically all of the sports internationally were largely run by the disability groups for that disability in the UK.
Okay.
BBS would be linked into IBSA, and therefore
Yeah.
they would be involved with selections, they would be involved with everything to do with, say, blind athletics and wheelchair sport, etc.
Hmm.
And when I became chairman of British Blind Sport, or BASRAB, in the 80s, it was at the time when the Paralympic Association was being established. The issues were about how to get consensus across the disability groups. By and large, the disability groups acted in silos. They acted very individually. And one of the biggest challenges as chairman was for me to sign the charter for Paralympics, ceding responsibility for selection of blind athletes for the Paralympics to the Paralympic Association and not from BBS. And the other sports had to do this, other disability groups had to do the same. And that was really anxiety provoking in me because,
Yeah, I can imagine. You're
you
kind of letting
know,
go of your baby a little bit, aren't you?
exactly. And would they do it as good? Would they, how much influence could we have on that? Therefore, we automatically had a seat on the board of British Paralympic Association, but it was then the disability groups that then formed the Paralympic Association, not particularly a skill base in terms of, what
Mm.
we could offer. And I think that was crucial. I think that's where disability sport then in the public arena has really then started to move forward because it's not seen as factions. It's actually a movement
The
that's
movement. Yeah,
promoting disability sport across the board.
yeah. I think BBS is, even in my time here, which over that 15 years, you've kind of seen that. I call us like a family. I work with the other NDSOs, and then for any listeners, that's the other national disability sports organisations, such as Dwarf Sport UK, Cerebral Palsy Sport, and I call us a family. And I'm very strong on that. We're in this together. And that movement that you talk about is really what's going to make things happen. Another thing that I often say is, a snowflake is really fine and delicate and individual, and it's quite beautiful. But if you put it all together with other snowflakes, it can literally stop traffic. And that's what we need to do. And I
Yeah.
think there's still a long way to go. I think British Blind Sport has come a very long way. Just to wrap up a couple of things, I've still got some burning questions, really.
Hmm.
One of which is, when and why did we change the name? Because I don't fully know, and you might know, or is that just going to be one of those mysteries that I'm never quite sure about?
I think there are two aspects to it. I think the fact that it was such a long name and no one actually knew what BASRAB was,
Yeah.
what's BAS got to do with it, or RAB. And then you had to then say British Association, and it was just so. And
Mouthful.
then when we formed the Paralympic Association,
Yeah.
you had to have the wheelchair sports or blind sport or amputee sport, etc., were the sort of key elements to it.
Yeah.
But there was nothing in the title of BASRAB when it was shortened that mentioned that it was anything to do with blind. And of course, we wanted to then call it blind and partially sighted sport, but basically that was again too much of a mouthful, really.
Mhm.
In those days, blind was a generic term, and now it's vision impaired and sight impaired, etc.
Yeah.
But in those days, blind basically people knew covered people from no sight up to 660 vision, and then we didn't have categorization, so you didn't have B1, B2, B3s in those days. It was, you could either see a bit or not, and that was largely
The
the
classification has come a long, long way in those 50 years as well, hasn't it?
yes, yes,
Yeah,
yeah, and
hugely.
and quite challenging as well, because there is very difficult to empirically test how much someone can see other than
Yeah.
asking them, and that often does cause issues. And obviously we've had cheating in the past and
Mhm.
drug issues in the past, etc., because suddenly sport has got a high profile. Winning
Mm.
has meant some of the downsides of it. Winning actually becomes everything, because it can mean money, it can mean status, and therefore people have, like everyone else, has looked to take the odd shortcut.
Mm. And classification is still going through lots itself. And you're
Yes,
right. The other thing is it is very difficult to gauge when somebody has or what level of sight loss, but particularly if it's not a stable condition.
yes.
Because sight loss can improve, it can get worse. I do feel that those that are still researching and going through classifications. Another one of my mystery questions is why are we in Leamington Spa? How did that come about?
Oh, that was really basically the people that were involved around the time. They were all Midland based. When we moved from virtually just volunteer, and we obviously didn't have money then to bring in to start, as we expanded, as we had subcommittees running the cricket, the football, the athletics, the swimming, and then we had broader national issues and international issues and memberships of IBSA, etc. We then basically said what we needed was to build that up in terms of some staff to really take hold of that, because it couldn't
Drive
be
it.
done by
Yeah.
volunteers. And someone involved at that stage was based in the Midlands and basically said, well, we could look at perhaps setting up something there. It largely then meant that we could then have a central point, which was the
Mm.
Midlands. It's not London centric in the far flung reaches. And the premises that were on offer, I think they did have an office somewhere else originally, and then that office in Leamington then became available. A decision was made to go forward with that.
You've answered an age-old question of the last 15, almost 15 years for me there, because I really didn't have a clue, and people have asked me that many, many times. Mike, just before I wrap up, and there's just two things. One, what do you see today, 50 years on, with all of that behind you? What do you see today as the biggest barrier to people being able to participate in sport for people with sight loss?
I think it probably goes back to something we were talking about just now, is knowledge of what's available
Yeah.
is a barrier. Locally, that being available is probably the biggest barrier, because as we were talking about before, the numbers potentially of certainly younger vision impaired are comparatively small. So if it's a team sport, you aren't going to have that in every area because there aren't enough people to form a team.
Yeah,
So
we do see that.
how
And we
they
see that for
travel,
adults as well sometimes. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course, yeah, but yeah, and they probably are slightly more able to travel. But if you've got to go
Mm.
15 or 20 miles to do something fairly basic, like join a football team or a goalball team or whatever, then basically that is a difficulty. You've got 75% of vision impaired people unemployed, and
Mhm.
they're of working age. So finance is a key issue. If you're then having to spend money on fares or taxes, because a lot of the things that aren't easily on public transport routes, then basically that's another factor. And I think what will happen as well is, with the expansion that we've had, with things like the state of the economy, etc., we've already seen sponsorship in terms of some of the events being withdrawn or reduced or stopped. Therefore, the continuation of some of those lifelines is really in the balance. I'm a trustee of the primary club, and we've just given out just over £200,000 in grants this year, and the number of bids that we had to reject because we just didn't have enough money. It was tragic. 200,000 for something like 70 applications was what we could offer.
I think the economic situation is affecting everybody, but disproportionately disabled people. We look at the recent welfare reforms that's been discussed, and there may be changes still. I think there's real pressure and real disparity for disabled people. And as movement, going back to your movement comment that you made earlier, that is something that we need to fight, because people's physical health is so connected to their mental health. It is so connected to taking pressure off the NHS. So, it's not just sport.
But what it gives to you for life. When I look back at 4, 5, 6 sporting memories, and they are massively, massively important parts of my life. And I still get emotional now when you think back of finishing the London Marathon and the person that enabled me to do that. Or last year, I did my last ski race in 2024, 50 years after I started skiing in Norway. And I skied with my guide who taught me to ski in 1974. He came and guided me, and I was in tears at the end. We did a 20K race. It was just both of us in our mid 70s, and it was just so wonderful. That sense of friendship that we've maintained for 50 years, all through sport. He never met me before he guided me on skis. He was in the army at that stage, then became a ski instructor, and we used to go and train at his school that he had. That friendship is something that sport's given me, and those memories that it's given me.
Amazing. That is amazing. And actually, that makes me feel quite emotional. I wasn't there, but I'm kind of picturing it in my head when you got to the finishing line. What about your looking back? Do you have a favorite memory? It could be just a moment from your time with British Blind Sport, or BASRAB as it was. Just one way you go, this is great.
I think when I was over managing the athletics teams abroad, we went there with the BBS group, Dave Hislop, and we had people like the famous Sheila Carey, ex-runner, incredible people supporting us. And just the buzz of the athletes and, taking on other athletes in the European Championships was just so special. And having the sing song in the evening and just getting into grips with the fact that you're all there together, we're all there for one purpose. It was just so good.
One more thing, Mike, and I kind of don't want to wrap this up because I could talk to you all day, and I feel like we've just touched the surface. But just one thing, what are your hopes for British Blind Sport going forward for our future?
I think stability in terms of being able to fulfill lots of things, lots of ideas come up, and then basically they can't be sustained because of finance, because of people around, etc. What I hope is a level of stability for BBS that can allow them to carry on their pioneering information giving, or their challenges, or their coordination across the other sports, because basically, as genericism, if you like, across the disability sports world is really wonderful, but also you need that expertise being pushed in so that issues to do with blindness in sport isn't then suddenly marginalized or forgotten. I've been involved with various sports bodies, and lots of the day-to-day stuff is great, but when it comes down to the website, you can't access the information to allow you to do that particular sport. So it falls a hurdle because no one's put in the 5 penneth and say, if you'd have come to us with your building of that particular part of it, we could have advised on better accessibility, etc. So BBS's role, I think, is crucial in ensuring that the issues of vision impairment are maintained and put into the arena and then aren't marginalized, but at the same time we listen to the other groups, because a lot of things that are good for the blind are good for people with learning disability, for the
Yeah.
deaf, etc., because it's around signage, it's around color contrast, and
Yeah.
those are good for everyone. It's not just the vision impaired. Learning from that is crucial.
Well, part of what we do actually, there's a couple of things there. We really want to, and we do work very hard in collaboration. We cannot work as a silo. We need to be able to help national governing bodies of sport, active partners, to understand how they need to can and make adaptations for people with sight loss. Also, part of our education program is around that. We have a big educational workforce arm now, and that wasn't there even 10 years ago when I started. But just what you just said there really does hit a nerve, because when we go into a leisure centres, for example, and we say this is how you make somebody feel welcome with sight loss, then I would like to think that just the fact that we're training people to stop and think about being welcoming, being kind, being patient, actually can be used for all people with different impairments, and actually all people generally.
Yes. Access isn't just physical, it's
No.
actually the emotional aspect, it's how people can either be independent, and that's fantastic, but when they are dependent and need help, then it's got to be offered in the right way.
Mm.
When I go to the gym now and I bang on about them, everyone active run the particular gym, and I can't believe it. There's someone there, they've changed into a new centre now, but they will make sure that the gate's through. I can walk through. I have a guide dog. I go in the office. The dog's probably more popular than I am, so they
Isn't
have
that
him in the
always the
office.
case?
They have him in the office. They will water him, feed him, walk him. They then want to know if I can find the changing rooms. And then going into the gym, they say, right, what you're doing first today and how long. And that just makes it a real buzzy place for me to be inclusive, but also independent as well. And it's that sort of, and that's not rocket science.
Absolutely.
I'm paying a full membership. I'm not asking for a charitable donation. I want the service that any other person could or should expect if they're paying for the membership.
You've been on so many boards and been able to influence, and we've just done a young trustees program.
Interesting, you've just mentioned that because I think one of the other massive things that BBS did for me was that it was one of the first. I mean, I'd set up Metro and that was fine, but being on the board of BBS, all of the trustees were vision impaired. We didn't have
Hmm.
any non-vision impaired. And suddenly you realize just how liberating that was
Yeah.
for so many people. And then you realize that this was some of them were in very boring jobs, were being fairly mundanely treated, and suddenly they were in a position where they could offer their views, their experience, and people listened to it. And that, I think, really did boost the self belief in so many of the board members that we had over those early days.
Well, it sounds like British Blind Sport, along with the VPA, has a little bit of magic that has been sprinkled. It sounds like it's definitely was sprinkled on that first group of founding members. We are so grateful for everything that you have done and everything that you've achieved to help blind and partially sighted people to have more fun and active lives. And it's not just about the sport. You've touched on friendships. You talked about friendship that is 50 years old. You've talked about the power that sport has given you, the experiences that it's given you. I'm going to wrap it up with a big thank you. I'm sure, and I have no doubt, that we will always stay in touch.
Very much so. And good luck for the next 50 years for BBS because you'll still be needed in the years to come because we need that voice. We need that voice in the sporting world still. Unfortunately, still we need it, but I think it's going to be needed for time to come. And I'm really, really pleased that BBS are filling that role.
Oh, thank you, Mike. Thank you so much for your time.